Respected viewers of Deen TV, I greet you with the universal greetings of peace in Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The peace and blessings of God Almighty upon you all. Wish to welcome you once again to this edition of the IPSA seminar series, where we deal with issues that are pertinent to the Muslim community per se in particular, but also relevant obviously to society at large, and which has also its global and its international implication. The seminar series have been focusing on the issues pertaining to the concept of the caliphate, pertaining to the concept of how international as well as geopolitical influences have played its role within the Muslim world in the Middle East, and how from a Muslim community, and more particularly an Islamic authentic perspective, we ought to view these dilemmas as well as these phenomena from a middle path and a middle way perspective. In order to further this discussion in this particular regard, we have great pleasure and honor in this episode to invite the President of the Muslim Judicial Council, one of the foremost religious leadership organizations in our country, to join us, Maulana Ihsaan Hendricks. Maulana Ihsaan Hendricks, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair, and thank you very much for joining us on our program this evening.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh Ihsaan, and to all the viewers of Deen TV and fellow South Africans.
Maulana Ihsaan Hendricks, as the President of the Muslim Judicial Council, we are acutely aware that the MJC plays a very important leadership role in our country, and more particularly in reference to the Muslim community. And we do know that when especially international phenomena, and when they have their implications on a national level as well, unfold, and we as a Muslim community and as citizens of our country require guidance, that the Muslim Judicial Council very often and most times plays that leadership role for the Muslim community. In this particular regard, Maulana Ihsaan, I do recall that as we have had at one occasion for the first time understanding how those events that are playing and unfolding in the Muslim world has its ripple effect and its trickling down effect in our community. We've had observances or incidences of recruitment taking place here in a South African context and even in the Western Cape. At that time, of course, Maulana Ihsaan, under your leadership, very capably, press briefings were called in order to give guidance and in order to obviously give a sense of context and perspective in this regard from the point of view of the Muslims in South Africa. Maulana Ihsaan Hendricks, from that time when the Muslim Judicial Council gave that perspective to the Muslim community as well as to the rest of South African citizens in our country, many things have also been unfolding and happening since that particular time. Would Maulana Ihsaan Hendricks perhaps just very kindly reflect for us in terms of that particular incident, or rather the incident obviously of the possibilities of recruitment of these events in our country, and how in the subsequent period up until perhaps today, some of the relevant matters that have also unfolded in this particular regard.
Shukran, Jazakumullah khairan, Honorable Sheikh Ihsaan, and to the viewers of Deen TV, fellow South Africans. I must say from the offset that the possibility of the recruitment of the incident that we had a few months ago in Cape Town particularly was a huge wake-up call, not only for the Muslim Judicial Council, but for the rest of South Africa. And the wake-up call, as we begin to learn the facts attached to the possibility of the recruitment and the motion this recruitment started taking, we were completely shocked to know to what extent things are happening in a community that we are not really familiar with these type of developments unlike it is happening particularly in the Arab world, but inevitably we are part of the Muslim world. I, from the offset, want to say that that type of exercise compelled me as the president of the Muslim Leadership Council to summons the broader structures in the Muslim Leadership Council to come to the table to have a better understanding of what is happening in our community. And I think one of the best exercises in the history, contemporary history of the MJC, was when we succeeded within less than 48 hours to draw the attention of most of the imams, which subsequently led to a press conference in the Muslim Judicial Council. I think that perhaps maybe it will be a bit too sensitive to deal with the actual case in itself, but the actual case was merely an indication for more complexities that was going to follow. It was not peculiar to that particular individual, but shortly after that, we came to know through our own intelligence that there were actually others who were standing ready in the line of recruitment. The shocking part is that if you have to deal with our 15, 16-year-old daughters and our sons, and I call them our sons and our daughters because they are indeed the responsibility of us as leaders in this community. And so I refer to them as our sons and our daughters because as they begin to experience the agencies at work who started mobilizing their recruitment material to damage the brilliant minds of our sons and daughters that can be better invested for the future of the society here in Cape Town, the society in South Africa, and humanity at large, much better than the dream of wanting to go to an area that they are not familiar with. And particularly an area that is known for its violence and the war that plays out in these particular areas. And so very necessary was appealing to the manabir, to the imams, that Friday from the mimbar, it was going to be important to indicate to the community that this is not going to be tolerated. But Sheikh Ihsaan, I am not going to hesitate to use this program and say that as much as we were concerned about our innocent sons and daughters being recruited and possible material for recruitment, we had a greater shock when we discovered that some of the recruiters in our community are people who have been entrusted with the education of our innocent sons and daughters. This is a bigger concern for us. Thirdly, very shockingly, when we come into the chambers of the Muslim Judicial Council, the headquarters, the central authority of the Muslim community, whether you accept it or whether you reject it, the MJC does have to act in that space of that responsibility. But to come within the space of that central authority and almost come and begin to articulate in such a way one's inclination to the establishment of Daesh and ISIS was a greater shock for us. And that, maybe for this particular point, when I went on to the national program and announcing that the MJC sees the need for developing what we call a toolkit for the imams to help our innocent youth, but also shockingly, and in my capacity as the president of the Muslim Judicial Council, I shiver to say on this national platform that 50%, if not more, in the ulama fraternity does not know the details of the operations of ISIS. And I say this with the consciousness that I know that people like ourselves who will take platforms like this are the first targets for the establishment of ISIS. We are more concerned about this type of blind support that our people are ready to give to an establishment that they know nothing of, to an establishment يستعملون المصطلحات المقدسة لسياستهم الخبيثة. An establishment that use sacred establishments, sacred terminologies extracted from the text of Hadith and the Quran for their dirty politics. This is of greater concern. And therefore, if the question is where we are now in terms of our analysis now differs from fundamentally in terms of where we now need to zoom in and begin to equip our imams and say, it's not just about a video clipping that we saw on social media that makes us react in that particular manner. No, we are going to what is known as the watha'iq. We are going to the actual governance document, the document that steers the Tanzim al-Dawla al-Islamiyya, and begin to see the contradictions between what is in the documents and what is executed in public. And shockingly, the community should know it's not about whether you like it or not, or whether it is Islamic or not. And so many aspects come in the Islamic paraphernalia, but it is detrimental, not only for Muslims, it's detrimental for humanity. And so, the question and the discourse of Khilafah through the window of this militia, the discourse of what is the correct understanding of Khilafah through this type of militia that we see in the Arab world. And that is a discussion that I think we need to take to its logical conclusion, how the Arab world is filled with these militias. And it is almost like the enemies have a clear supply line all the time. You can supply the official state army, you can supply the militias, you can supply another militia, and in fact the Arab world is filled with militias today. And so, the discourse of Khilafat is one that is an academic discussion, that it is there in our classical source, correctly to be explained to our people. But can you imagine that today, to the rest of the world, how do we explain a caliphate through the window of the type of violence, the qatl and the dhabh, the massacres and the brutality? And therefore, one of the very leading scholars in Syria, and I recently have attached a lot of importance to the works of Sheikh Salahuddin al-Itlibi, and you know the classical reference is Ahlu Makkah adra bi shu'ubiha. The people of Makkah are most knowledgeable about
their affairs. Yes.
About their affairs. لا يفتى والمالك في المدينة. You don't give a fatwa when Imam Malik is in Medina. So how do we imagine ourselves at the most southern tip of Africa to be more authoritative on the question of the evil practices of Daesh, the Tanzim al-Dawla al-Islamiyya? Can we be more of an authority than the likes of Sheikh Salahuddin al-Itlibi, who comes from Halab, who can tell you this is. There's no, somebody said that recently he was asked to give a fatwa. He says, why do you ask me to give a fatwa on something aslan la alaqata laha bil Islam? It doesn't have any alaqa. It doesn't have any connection to Islam. And I think we have to maximize programs of this nature, because every second, every 24 hours in our community, we run the risk of recruitment. And I don't know, but I'll take the responsibility. As we are sitting here today, August, what is the date today?
12th of August.
12th of August. The 12th of August, by this morning we received the official communication of 16 young people from South Africa who managed to escape from the clutches of Daesh in transit in Turkey and back to South Africa. Who ultimately pays the price? It is the Muslim community that is going to pay the price. I recently was shocked when somebody related to me and said that there are references in the indigenous community in South Africa that say, well, if you people claim that you don't want to live here and you want to live under a caliphate, then why don't you leave this country? So we are playing with the citizen right of every Muslim, placing the Muslim community at risk because of the grandeur of ad-Dawla al-Islamiyya.
Maulana, if I very kindly may come in, and I would love us to take this angle that you've just raised now in terms of your own exposure to the analysis of not third-hand parties, but people in whose company and in whose association you directly function and cooperate. And their analysis, I think for a following program, we'd love to focus on that a little bit more. And I think Maulana has also, you've mentioned about how it's really the phenomenon of ignorance, really, of real understanding of Islam that allows people to be infatuated, to allows people to become romantically somehow admiring a concept, because like you said, the employment of sacred terminologies, the employment of Islamic texts, and all of that obviously is the domain and the realm of scholars who are specialized in these fields, and not just every person on the road and on the street who listens to the recitation of text or the usage of certain terminologies, and then we fall hook, line and sinker. And obviously, Maulana, we also do understand that there is a broader psychology that is also at play, where especially young people, for example, do see that in many parts of the world, especially in the Muslim world, that where sometimes, or rather most of the times, where violence is being also meted out and violence is being perpetrated, that the victims obviously in these scenarios are most of the time are Muslims. And what you've obviously explained right now, Maulana, is that yes, we do find, and this is something that we have to come clear about as well, that when Muslims find themselves at the wrong end of violence being perpetrated against them, then we shouldn't also forget that many times this violence is being perpetrated by other Muslims as well. But many times, and obviously there's also the international geopolitics and the agendas of foreign powers that's also at play in the Muslim world. And so many times young people look at this and they obviously have their own analysis or their own sense of. Maulana, in our context, and you've mentioned also how sometimes within our institutions and maybe a good percentage of the leadership who's occupying, for example, positions on Manabir, do not have the correct tools and information at their disposal really to be authoritatively expressing themselves. But Maulana, from the position of the Muslim Judicial Council, it obviously has a very clear role that it plays. It is located within a South African, obviously, authentic as well as an authoritative position within South African society, not only the Muslim society but also broader South African society. The MJC also plays an important role in terms of liaising with government and in fact providing understanding and perspective and analysis even to government. So Maulana, from the perspective of the Muslim Judicial Council and how it believes the South African Muslim society in the first instance, and then broader South African society perhaps even in addition, what is the MJC's guidance in a sense? What is the MJC's perspective that it wishes to consolidate and reiterate to society?
Sheikh Ihsaan, your question and your introduction to that does have more than one particular component. The last one is the most important one. But allow me just to take 2 steps back and say, I think it is very necessary for us to have a better understanding of Al-Alam Al-Arabi, of the Arab world. And unfortunately, the last 100 years in the Arab world is not a good chapter at all. We keep in mind that the Muslim community traditionally here in South Africa, and particularly in the Cape, a great respect for the Arab world and the Arab community and so on. But that is one aspect. I think that if we examine the Arab world for the last 100 years, then it is the most natural result that the complexities and the violence and the bombardment that is taking place today was the most natural natija, natural result that was going to come. In fact, let's be honest and say, as the 2 of us conduct this program today on this national platform of Deen TV, this is impossible to have this frank discussion in the Arab world. And in fact, the spring revolution, Thawratul Rabi, was in fact the ordinary people in the Arab world signaling the point that they are completely fed up of the despotic regimes in the Arab world, the tyranny that is in the Arab world. You call it whatever. You can start from one side of the Arab world to the other side of the Arab world, and you will see almost with no exception. With no exception. And therefore, it is the cry of the ordinary masses in the Arab world. It is the ordinary people that cries for their rights, the restoration of their rights. Betrayal has become a very common aspect in the Arab world. I'm not saying that it is peculiar to them, but because we look at the Arab world as to be the cradle of Islam, our first reference of Islam is always to the Arab world. And so we can dissect each and every country. Some of these countries we have personally traveled, we have seen, and we have listened to many reports and many stories of many. And so that is one particular area that I think we need to pay a little, better attention. Why? Because if we compare our 21 years of our democracy and freedom as South Africans, then we are still in a much better position than what people find themselves in many majority Arab Muslim countries. I think that the complexity of the politics and the geopolitics, if we talk about geopolitics in the Arab world, what are we talking about? We are talking about the very risk that an Arab neighbor country has with his neighbor country of not enjoying what he is supposed to be enjoying. And so that geopolitical influence is not necessarily outside the Arab world. And for a long time, our first critique is always Zionist influence. Whilst I am a very strong activist in the Palestinian arena, I believe, and I'm ready to take this platform to say that the Zionists are not to be blamed for every first complexity that is in the Muslim world and the Arab world. In fact, I think there are many tricks that the Zionists learned from the Arab world. Very badly. But we don't want to be frank about it. We don't want to be frank about the betrayal of one Muslim to another Muslim. We don't want to be frank about the fasad al-mal, the corruption of one Muslim to another Muslim. We always see it as conspiracy theories. We always look for the challenges outside the Muslim community. لكن حقيقة في صف المسلمين. It is actually within the ranks of the Muslims. So I don't know, this program will perhaps maybe not allow us to go into all those areas. But I think enough as an indication to show where is Iraq today? Where is Syria today? Where is Palestine? We at once thought that the Palestinian situation, the biggest refugee chapter, the longest outstanding refugee chapter in the world, are the Palestinians. It's no more. The Palestinian position has been pushed to the back burner because there are thousands, if not millions, of more refugees in the Arab world, in the Muslim world. And so you see this. In one particular instance, you have a monarch who supports a military coup in one part of the Arab world, and in another part of the Arab world, it wants to defend it and say this is Shar'iyatul Qiyada, this is the legitimacy of leadership, and on the other side, it is fine to support a military coup. These are the complexities that we are faced with. They have all the institutional instruments, but above all you have the mukhabarat and the amn al-dawla. We are not accustomed to these things in South Africa. Once, an Arab brother told me, he said, Sheikh Ihsaan, the hand of the mukhabarat, of the secret police is so powerful in the Arab world. At night time, if I come home and my wife is asleep, I look at her carefully and I ask myself, I wonder whether she is not working for the mukhabarat, for the secret police. This is the nature of how they operate. We have to be a little bit frank about this. And in fact, if we talk about scarring the identity of Islam, then the chapters of what happened in Tunisia prior to the Arab Spring was precisely the political system that directly scarred the identity of the Muslim community. And people said, no, this is enough.
Maulana Ihsaan, I have to, unfortunately and regrettably, bring this chapter to a close, our discussion. I was indicating earlier on that we would precisely, for our follow-on chapter or episode, go more into this angle that you have obviously raised in terms of the international complications, the complexities in the Muslim world in particular, but also the geopolitical complexities in that particular region. Maulana Ihsaan, I'm looking forward to sharing some more time with you and for your insights and thoughts in that particular regard. I think especially in the Muslim community, this particular angle, maybe its analysis coming right from amongst our own leadership, I do personally believe is in short supply. I think a person in the position of Maulana Ihsaan Hendricks as the President of the Muslim Judicial Council, with your access to first-hand information of the unfolding events in the Muslim world and what's happening on the ground, your analysis and your perspectives are certainly essential for the Muslim viewership here in South Africa, but also for broader South African society. Maulana Ihsaan Hendricks will pick up on these conversations again in our next episode. Dear and honored respected listeners and viewers, that is all we have time for this evening. We look forward to having you again on the IPSA seminar series. I bid you Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.